This is Rydo and we're back. Today is Wednesday, December 8th. I don't know if this is new, but it's new to me, certainly, this new click to show ID thing. Which I guess that's probably smart to not just by default show the ID. Probably doesn't really matter too much though. I mean, what's the worst case scenario somebody does? They link to my account, maybe they could steal an account somehow through that way. I don't know. Frankly, at this point, if somebody stole my Shadowverse account, it would just be a good excuse to stop playing Shadowverse, if anything. I didn't play any Shadowverse off screen, including the arena run, which I was supposed to have done. Let's see, I guess we want to re-roll the ranked wins so we don't have to play ranked if we're going to re-roll anything. Yeah, because now we have an overlap of one Bloodcraft potentially getting everything. Yeah, for the accountability section, in a funny way, as much as I complain about never being able to wake up at like 8 a.m. or at 6 a.m. and going to sleep at like 10 p.m. a normal kind of 9 to 5 work schedule, sleep schedule. Like, I have actually been waking up at those times, and it kind of does not work, particularly in the winter, very well for me, because I wake up at those times, but then I'm tired or I'm getting distracted by other things. There's honestly a lot of benefit that is underspoken about as far as waking up at like 10 p.m. and working till 6 a.m. just in the fact that there are less people around, less people distracting you, wasting your time. And I think a lot of people, particularly in the work environment, if they thought about it, would recognize that. In the school environment too, like certainly if you had a 1-to-1 ratio as far as students and teachers, then and there were no other students in the classroom, then there would be a lot less distractions, because it is a very valid argument or complaint, I think, that happens where there's one child that either gets singled out as being a problem or is a problem. Take your pick. Sometimes it's a little bit of A, a little bit of B. And that one child out of the group of 30 childs in a classroom then distracts the teacher for 10-20 minutes. And none of the other children are given the opportunity to learn at that point. That being said, from the perspective of the student, there often were times when I very much appreciated, or I was very much the distraction, because the teachers, from the students' perspective, were often just giving busy work, or just wasting our time, or just like not really trying to educate us in any way. Anyways, there is definitely a counterpoint to the idea of, well, teachers don't ever have enough time to teach, because they're having to deal with children causing distractions, and sometimes the teachers are distractions too, and they're flipping out and they're doing something inappropriate that's not helpful also. But the counterpoint to the idea that the problem students are making the education worse for the kids needs to be reevaluated in part against the fact that some teachers are just straight up not teaching. They're giving like quizzes over things that you were supposed to read over the night outside of school, which is understandably seen as unfair by the students. Like, if the teacher's literally not teaching in the classroom and then giving you quizzes and just busy work during the classroom time, and then expecting you, and then coming back and making a catch-22 complaint saying, well, I wasn't able to actually teach it today, so you're going to have to read a chapter overnight. Like, the whole concept of homework is really BS, and that is a point certainly in school that needs to be really addressed, and they need to get rid of it, because literally homework is working off the clock, and there's not a legitimate legal business in the United States that should or legally can require people to work off the clock. Like, let's just call it what it is. Yeah. And in case you don't know what working off the clock means, it means you're doing work that you would not be doing otherwise for a company without being paid for that time, which violates the incredibly tenuous social contract that already existed as far as employee-employer go, where you are selling your time for money. Working off the clock, you are literally being a slave at that point, because you're not getting paid for your time. So to be a little bit extreme, the fact that schools fully embrace the idea of slavery amongst their employees, their students, who are supposed to be the employees of the next generation, they're fully instilling that idea, is unacceptable and really needs to be addressed. Now, I'm not saying quizzes never should be done or tests should never be done. That there should be checks for understanding. I'm not sure that most quizzes or tests actually care too much about ensuring that students are actually understanding what's going on or what's trying to be taught, but there should be some level of that. I think there's definitely flaws in the way things are implemented, and I'm going on an education route today, which rant, which doesn't happen too often. And I've got a whole nother rant in my back pocket after this rant. I think a more conversational approach would be ideal. Just making sure, talking to people and not putting pressure on them and not grading people for not knowing things. Like, it is backwards to say we're gonna test you to see if you've learned this, and if you haven't learned this, we're going to punish you, when really the punishment, if any punishment is necessary, should fall on the teacher for failing to teach. And that doesn't really happen. Like, if anything, I know there was a specific teacher that I once had when I was in school that did such a terrible job that they failed a significant amount of that class year, so much so that they were adding an entire extra class. So at least like 30 students were having to be sent to summer school because they had all failed because of this teacher doing such a bad job of teaching them. So you would think that that teacher then would not be eligible to be the one teaching the summer school class. But no, that's exactly the opposite of what happened. So this bad teacher, who could not teach the students in the first place, was rewarded with extra pay for teaching in the summer a class of students she had failed miserably. That's at the very least an obvious conflict of interest. But yeah, that is how it goes. Or that's how it went. That's not how it should go.
That was almost amusing.
Yeah, I don't even know how I got on that rant, really. You know, sometimes you just take a breath and then it all disappears.
The gods will know.
Yeah, I was talking about, yeah, waking up and that whole and that not really being that useful for me because of distractions. And frankly, yeah, there would be a lot less distractions, and it is generally better for me if I could maintain waking up at 10 p.m. and pre-recording things and having them air for normal people's schedules during the day. That doesn't really work for it doesn't really work well for the live streaming, no. So I don't know how I could do that. If it would be kind of ridiculous for me to live stream at like 10 p.m. It is something I might experiment with if I ever became really big and successful, but frankly, by the time anybody gets big and successful on YouTube, they are so used to just manipulating the metrics and playing the game that they can't break out of it. PewDiePie is kind of the only person that is even slightly, to my knowledge, trying to break out of the rigorous schedule of streaming on YouTube. And still he is very much beholden to doing like Minecraft streams every now and then, meme reviews, things like that. In general, just putting out a video at a specific time.
For the world I love, I'll become a beast.
Okay. We could evolve and kill this guy. So, yeah, I didn't accomplish anything. I didn't work on the programming. I did schedule some videos, and the problem is, as I was debugging Batman Arkham City, I really had to go back and redo everything 2 or 3 times because I had missed a couple of videos, and just moving everything a day forward and then incrementing the episode number. And I got at a certain point I was gonna just leave it, but yeah, that's not what I really want to do. See if this works.
I will be back.
Flash of metal, a silent night.
So yeah, I need to work on the programs more. I also began and didn't actually start recording anything for the Batman Telltale series. I launched the app basically and then got distracted and then had to move. Didn't get anything done. And even today, I have yet another distraction that is going to ensure that I really don't get anything done after this stream today.
A pointed sword deserves a pointed response.
Moving on to the next rant, I listened to most of the Giant Bombcast, and months later, after spending weeks gaslighting, for lack of a better term, their audience about how good Deathloop is, they came out and basically giant bomb. Now that the release window is out, they've come back and said, yeah, actually I didn't really play Deathloop all the way to the end. Actually, it isn't that good. And I'm like, yeah, I think this is... I don't know what more do I need mentally to get away from listening to the Bombcast. The good news is I'm not really listening to it much. I'm watching it on YouTube at double speed. Half the time I'm falling asleep during the process anyways. So if anything, the only thing I'd be really I'm a little upset about is that using RSS feeds to get podcasts on my cell phone has somewhat shifted to now there's actually very few podcasts I'm listening to that way versus just using YouTube. And my RSS feed player would play things back at 2x if I wanted to do it that way. It's just I don't have it set that way.
Melt under my touch.
Things would definitely be different if I was ever leaving my Wi-Fi network. Speaking of my Wi-Fi network, I think I've got it working, but you never know. I have gone a couple of days with nothing really going too wrong. But yeah, it's still at its slow settings, and I still would like to turn up the speed, because I'm not seeing total disconnects at this point. I'm just seeing hitches, which I really shouldn't be seeing hitches, because I wasn't before. But at the current moment, I have the 5 gigahertz and the 2.4 gigahertz separated, and I've turned off the network time protocol client. I've told it to synchronize through a script once when it boots, but not try and synchronize more. I think that is another avenue to investigate, at least, that maybe it is just straight up locking up the processor when it's trying to connect to the network time protocol servers, the NTP servers, which that is the problem of Linux, I suppose, would be the right one to blame there. Is that Linux, I don't think, is a real-time operating system in the same way that Windows is not a real-time operating system, in the sense that it isn't running the programs non-stop no matter what. Instead, it is a threaded, priority-based operating system where certain processes sleep for a few milliseconds so another program can run, which is the more efficient, smart way to run a operating system where you're going to do a lot of things. But honestly, for router software, as much as you wouldn't want to get away from Linux, going to something that actually is a pure real-time operating system might make sense. And I wouldn't be surprised if there actually is a way to adjust the kernel settings or something like that in Linux to make it act as a real-time operating system, and DDWRT just simply doesn't have that happening. And at the core of it, it probably doesn't need to go to that level of extreme. It probably just needs to fix its software, the NTP client, so it doesn't lock things up.
And so our pact is full.
There's a fairly common problem that happens if your network time is, if your time or your clock is out of sync, but it has to be fairly out of sync. Not just a few seconds, but it needs to be about, I would say, 12 hours out of sync minimum, which it's kind of hard to get to that without accidentally changing the date or the time on your clock computer.
Let us settle this ere dawn.
It's actually, yeah, I really didn't even have much of a rant against Giant Bomb. It's just, I think they've fully produced and shown that they are industry shills to their friends at the very least, and that they will straight up lie. They will just straight up lie about the quality of games to try and get it to sell more.
The truth lurks in the dark.
Which, yeah, that definitely shows them to be untrustworthy. Particularly at this point, Giant Bomb really not doing quick looks on games. That isn't just because there aren't any games right now, but they've completely given up the ghost of being anything video game related. It's basically when one falls, another one rises as far as X-Play, and I have really no interest in actually watching X-Play, and I've successfully maintained to not do that.
Delta cannon, fire.
I'm also in a very weird position personally, in that I'm just not in a position where I really have time or money. Like, let's just be honest. It's not financially intelligent for me to buy a game brand new and play it day one, when that won't get me any more views, or even if it did get me more views, it won't get me monetized until I have potentially 500 more subscribers, which I'm just not really likely to ever see that happen.
My thunderbolts shall guide you, if they don't kill you first.
Scatter like the blossom.
So yeah.
No.
But yeah. I wonder.
Nothing stops me once I got my
I wonder if there would be
on.
any value. And I've been ranting too much now. But I wonder if there would be any value of doing a YouTube video just talking about other video game news sites. Like, just straight up going, I mean, I could see a different YouTuber, probably not me, just going, why Kotaku sucks, why Eurogamer sucks, why Giant Bomb sucks, why X-Play sucks, why you shouldn't listen to these people. Just really try to go with some counter programming and name recognition against big websites like that. Like, you definitely see a parallel there between other videos. I'm sure on YouTube, unless they've just been censored off, there are why CNN sucks, why MSNBC sucks, why Fox News sucks, stuff like that. I'm sure there's plenty of videos like that. And if you did it
Shall we cross swords?
accurately and carefully and scientifically, and you're not just throwing out opinions, I could see a content creator really go there. Particularly if you're familiar with all those sites, which is something that I imagine you'd have to put some research into. I could definitely just try and I doubt there aren't too many websites that have controversy lists for every video game news sites, and I doubt too many of those aren't just going to follow right back to Gamergate. My experience over the years of watching Giant Bomb puts me in a informed position about Giant Bomb, but if you really wanted me to if you really wanted me to talk about Kotaku, for instance, I haven't watched or looked at Kotaku in a very long time, and there is certainly a way you would have to phrase all of this, because you probably wouldn't get sued for slander, although people might try, but you would have to date everything fairly accurately, because it doesn't really help much if you're talking about, say, a specific person working a specific job, and that person has long since stopped working at that job. Although in fairness, that is one very common way in which people avoid criticism too, is they simply shuffle around the source of the criticism, or the bad character. Like, a great example of that would be the video game journalist, quote unquote, that was just straight up stealing reviews from and plagiarizing reviews from everybody else, YouTubers and small time people. You would definitely have to say, at this specific time it was discovered that this employee was hired, and this speaks very poorly on their vetting procedure as far as hiring employees. And I think if you were going to make a series like that, like, honestly, that probably would be a series that I would want to do to more as a PBS educational type content, more than even I think people really would want it. But you would probably end up saying a lot of the same things, where this website hires contractors and doesn't pay their employees, or have full-time employees, and their vetting is questionable because of this instance or this instance. Like, you would end up saying that for almost every website, is that they hire freelance people. And how many times could you say, like, here's a website that allegedly gets 1 million views, and yet they're still using freelance contractors? That's one of the things certainly about this new era of Giant Bomb that's fairly ridiculous, is that they were the one website that was owned by a big company, seemed to have a big budget, or at least they were owned by CBS before and seemed to have a big budget. They kept a lot of employees on. Now, arguably, I think Giant Bomb maybe fails in the fact that they have this, like, production staff that is theirs and theirs alone, where the SiriusXM radio production staff model may be better, where you have producers and equipment and studios that are being used all day, every day, and the producers are doing 3 or 4 different shows with different talent, as opposed to the producers really just doing Giant Bomb stuff. Like, had the same producers between GameSpot and Giant Bomb been shared, that probably would have cut the budget a bit more and maybe stopped them from being sold away, which clearly they would have been better off had they not been sold off. Okay, well, I think that's enough rambling. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to get away from playing video games though. Like, every other time anybody's ever even suggested the idea of doing something different than playing video games, I've pretty much dismissed it, or even, and I've really not even had a lot of thoughts around that idea. The biggest thing I do now, as far as not playing video games, is talking about video game news, and even in that, I still have the background noise of Shadowverse happening. So this is terribly depicted. Says, welcome to Aaron Roach, Diversity and Inclusion Director for the Canadian Studios. This is from Ubisoft Montreal. That is really bad HTML that they should fix. I mean, having white text over a picture background. But whatever. That's one of 2 or 3 things that have been announced by Ubisoft that we'll cover. This might be the beginning, if you want to take it that way, where this might be the beginning of Ubisoft in general trying to shake up its status, because at the very least GameDeveloper.com is still mad at Ubisoft for the alleged and frankly disproven atrocities that have been thrown against Ubisoft and how they treated their employees. Yeah, it still very much in my mind is much ado about nothing, particularly when you contrast it to the just what seems like obviously true allegations of Activision Blizzard. I would even be willing to throw a bone and say Ubisoft may have mishandled some of the things that were accused of them, but the fact that GameDeveloper.com in particular keeps going on and on about it without any new news to report is very reminiscent of CNN just talking about Trump even after he was no longer president, or liberals in general. Actually, it's frankly at this point more reminiscent about people talking about Hillary Clinton not being elected.
Show me the limits of your will.
Which that's been going on even longer. And, yeah.
Let the immorality tour begin. Scatter like the blood.
Just see if we can.
Let your inner demon give in to your desire.
That was almost amusing.
You have summoned the blade of purgation here.
Let's see. Sony has put out, oddly, on its sms.playstation.com, which I don't know what. I assume SMS stands for Sony Media Studios and not short message system. But it still says PlayStation. They put out the God of War 2018 PC system requirements and features trailer, which this is a fairly small picture. And if I click on it, it really isn't making it bigger, it's making it smaller. This is probably a great example of what you would not want to do when making a graph or picture. Is don't make it a picture, first of all. Make it text. Make it zoomable, scalable, and fontable. Let's try something here. I don't think I've ever shown off my magnifying app. This may break things. Okay, it does work. So I have mapped a script to run magnifier in a hover mode from Windows, which you can do, but isn't obviously done through the GUI. And when I press a button on my mouse, it brings it up, and when I press another button, it kills it. It just kills the task. So for Ultra 4K at 60 frames, you would need a Ultra graphic settings, an RTX 3080 10 gigabit, or an AMD RX 68 XT. You also need an i9 9900 8-core 3.6 gigahertz, or an AMD Ryzen 3950X 16-core 3.5 gigahertz, 16 gigabits of RAM, which is funny because I'm either rocking like 30 to 64 gigabits of RAM that are DDR RAM. This is actually wrong. Single rate DDR is almost certainly not what they mean by this, unless they just are not using RAM at all. You probably need at minimum DDR3 RAM, not if not DDR4 preferred, and 70 gigabytes of space. High settings at 1080p 60, though, it would be more my style, just because it's impossible to upload higher rates. GTX 1070. They're also not really comparing this to previous generations so much. So as a 2060 is probably the equivalent of a 1070. So, but they're not mentioning that. It doesn't really strike me as there being a lot needed. And you probably wouldn't want to jump down to 1080 30. If you were going to jump down to the recommended settings, I would say jump down in resolution for more frame rate.
Like the moon on the water's surface.
The amount of hard drive space is really high, and pretty much the minimum they're saying is a 70 gigabyte hard drive, but at recommended states they want an SSD. They're giving you specific versions of Windows, which is interesting. But yeah, you really shouldn't be expecting too much from God of War, as it is a couple years old. Yeah, it would be fairly crazy for them to demand the highest of the highest, but they kind of are. That is a potential problem with PC gaming, and I could see is certainly a reason why people would be upset with PC gaming in general, is that you just kind of have this constant push to feel like you have to upgrade things over and over again to play the newest games. Whereas console games at least give you a snapshot of quality, where you buy the Xbox Series X, it's going to last you 3 or 4 years, and games are going to be programmed to still run on the Series S and X just fine. Although at a certain point also, I still feel like even PC gamers should not be snobs about it and just be happy with 1080 60. It works for almost every scenario, unless you've got a big 45-inch or higher screen right in front of your face. You're probably not going to see a difference there. Yeah, I think I would also say that God of War needs some better. This is a weird little zoom in. It does. It needs better screenshots, because like looking at the back of the head of the boy and seeing these little tattoos is a little disconcerting, first of all. And you just never really see much of the environment or much of the enemies, and I have to assume that there is a lot of that actually happens in the game, and they just seem to oddly be poorly focused on it. And then you look at God of War and you're seeing the back of his head and the ashy skin, which isn't particularly appealing to look at. You're seeing armor, which is fairly simplistic leather armor. Like, this isn't an amazingly interesting bow or arrows or anything. It's very realistic. They went for hyper realistic, and I can't really get around the little dark nipples that are just constantly on display of the God of War. It's just like they're always out there. Whereas like in this screenshot, while this troll or ogre isn't particularly visually appealing, it's at least visually interesting. You have a little bit of flowers here. You have the boy way in the back here, and you're barely even seeing it. And then you just have kind of like a lot of fogginess or smokiness to consider. This axe is not particularly that interesting, and I wonder how much of that the axe and the shield here not being that interesting has to do with the fact that these items are upgradable, replaceable as far as weapons, instead of having just a visually canonical like weapon. And then he's got a head on the back of his belt that really should be standing out a lot more. Like, you could easily be forgiven for not even noticing that there is a humanoid head hanging on his belt behind him. And then it's like every screenshot is spot that nipple. It's kind of crazy. As for this actual story, yeah, there's improvements as far as enhanced graphics. You could read the article, certainly, but a lot of these improvements, and frankly, it's always the case that a lot of the improvements in video games as far as graphics are more experimental than guaranteed improvements.
A perilous threat looms over all the skies.
But yeah, if you were to compare, if you were going to ask me which would I prefer to look at between God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn, I would always pick Horizon Zero Dawn, just because it has more life to it, more foliage, more color. There's a female character in it that is frankly a little bit more interesting to look at than a muscly rageaholic in God of War. And as much as they've like refreshed and rebuilt the God of War characters' personality in the reboot, because I haven't played the reboot, I don't really have anything that makes me care about him as a character. Which may be straight up just an admittance that deep somewhere in my subconscious, I care more about fictional female characters than I do fictional male characters, all other things being equal. And yeah, I can see that being the case. Just a deep biological thing that all humans have, when you care more about the mothers and not so much about the fathers. I guess we should just move on and try and get through the news. Xbox is teasing 4 more PC titles to coming to Game Pass on day 1, which Okay, teasing.
I'll purge the dark.
That really doesn't mean anything. This is one of these articles that is kind of useless from Video Games Chronicles. It's like, okay, they'll be revealed at the Game Awards on December 9th. Is what they're saying. Halo Infinite's campaign missions can't be replayed. I've also heard reviewers who have early access say that there is definitely a reason that they have not described Halo as being an open world game, in so much so that they will actively kill you if you try to go outside of a certain region when you're not supposed to. So, yeah.
Scatter like the blossoms.
It is fairly questionable if Halo ever was really a game that was around the campaign as much as I would have liked it to be. But it definitely feels like Halo Infinite in particular is not living up to its name as far as being infinite and not being able to replay the campaigns. Which that seems like just ridiculous to not have a level select in a game, a modern game, a big AAA game. But I really have to question if... Sorry, I'm yawning already.
How empty it all is.
I really have to question, particularly on the campaign side, if people are going to say this really isn't a Halo game at all. It's just a Master Chief, a completely different game with Master Chief in it as the character. There's also like major complaints about just the microtransactions and how things have been ripped out of the battle pass to then be sold as DLC. Like to get a red outfit is one DLC, to get a blue outfit is another DLC. So if you are gonna do the standard red versus blue thing, meme, you're having to buy two separate DLCs. It's like, at the very least, if you were going to make that DLC, you would have put it together.
Hoist the divine blade high.
And I can't think for a second that there's some logical reason for this, that they are actively like trying to destroy the Halo series, and so that, I mean, what would be the argument there that they could then shift away from Halo and never have to make another Halo game again?
The truth lurks in the dark.
A magnificent battle.
Like, that doesn't really make sense. And it's not like at a certain point it would be, what is it, 305, not Bungie anymore, just trying to get away from making Halo games, or that not caring about making Halo games in the first place. You would have to assume that Microsoft still wants Halo games.
Like the moon on the water's surface.
And Halo is still a big name that sells, but I mean, if you really look at the last 10 years of Halo, it has pretty much been, let's see if we can make spin-off games, let's see if we can use the Halo name to sell to suckers and fanboys. If anything, you might argue that the abuse of the Halo branding is worse than even the abuse of the GTA branding, and maybe actually the worst abuse of any major brand that we've seen at all. Like, sure, there were some Activision Blizzard cell phone games that were announced, but those games I don't think came out at the very least. But yeah. And GTA at least has just shifted to GTA Online. And honestly, if Halo Infinite was just an online service and it was free, or if it was a MMO with free to start actions, maybe that would have worked a lot better for them. But at a certain point, Bungie went over and made Destiny, and Destiny, even though I would consider it a failure of a game by the time they had made Destiny 2, and by the nonsense that they've done with Destiny 2, I think Destiny still, Destiny 2 still is miles ahead of what a Halo MMO would be. Yeah. It would be interesting certainly to see how many actual Halo fanboys went over to Destiny and never turned back. And you could estimate that certainly a little bit by simply looking at the number of players playing Destiny versus the number of players playing Halo on the first launch week of Halo Infinite, the second launch week. Just keep an eye on those numbers, and you will, I think, fairly quickly see who has won between those two fights, whether it's Bungie that's important or whether it's Master Chief that's important. Moving on, Ubisoft is adding NFTs to its games, starting with Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This is their new Ubisoft Quartz beta. What is crazy about this, and I can't understate this, I think, at all, is how is this not exactly what got all the complaints and problems for Valve? Like, I think maybe Ubisoft doesn't care. Maybe websites just don't, video game companies just don't care. I know they have activist investors on their boards, and this is another argument certainly against companies having boards and selling shares or parts of their companies, is that they're literally selling their souls, and you see where that turns out. But yeah, activist investors have been asking video game companies, what's your NFT plan, from what I hear, quite a bit. But for Ubisoft to really do something is kind of insane. And I just don't see how this isn't going to turn into a marketplace that maybe is as, if not more successful than the Steam Valve market, but it's going to then also be completely overridden with all the same complaints and problems with the Valve market. And you definitely see that Valve is not trying at the moment to increase usage of their market. If anything, they are trying desperately to get away from ever doing anything with the market again. And you see that definitely in their sales, and the fact that they've stopped giving trading cards and booster packs really as items, and instead going with a non-monetary point shop. It's almost as if the plan is to get in before the legislation happens. And that may very well be the case, is that NFTs are just an attempt to get in before the legislation happens. And if Bitcoin isn't a scam, which I'll bite and I'll say I probably would agree that Bitcoin isn't a scam. There is definitely some problems with it being overinflated because other cryptocurrencies are scams, and then people are trading those other cryptocurrencies for Bitcoin, which is more of a established and solid currency. But yeah, if Bitcoin isn't a scam, NFTs definitely are. Though, like, there's no way around it. And frankly, I have been saying, if we had a Internet 2.0 where all images were on something like a blockchain, that'd probably be a good idea. If all pictures immediately, when uploaded to any server on this new internet, had to be in a blockchain, just by default were blockchained, and thus you could delete one image if you owned it originally, and it would leave the entire internet forever. And frankly, a collapsing blockchain concept actually would be nice, because there's, from my very rough understanding of it, a problem of parts of the blockchain just getting extremely long as more and more transactions happen. And I don't know if you even really could or should have a blockchain that traces where an image goes from point A to point B if it is just a picture that's going to show up on a website, more than there should just be a point of origin blockchain concept.
Scatter like the blossoms. I only deliver the most luxurious steps.
I should have probably evolved that.
I'll split you like a diamond. More jewels, more. Raise the price.
But yeah, while I do think that that part of it makes sense, the part of it being worth anything, worth real money, and it being just used in video games seems like it really doesn't make any sense.
I take so much for that axe.
Let's see. Okay, let's see if this works.
For the world I love, I'll become a beast.
Moving on, Video Games Chronicle has an article. A German court has told Nintendo to allow digital refunds right up to launch. At the moment, players can only cancel pre-orders more than 7 days before release. So this was a German high court case that Nintendo lost.
Nothing to fear.
Which, yeah, that seems very good for the German citizens, if only that was something that then got enforced everywhere else. Which, as much as you might hate the European Union and how they often would push their consumer protection things or their rules and laws on all of the EU citizens, which they arguably maybe didn't do as much of that as people claim they did. There is kind of a very standard and, in my opinion, good reasoning around that. In the same way that the Supreme Court in the United States forcing laws and enforcing laws throughout all the United States is a good thing, versus having 50 states that all could have incredibly different laws. And to a certain extent, they do have fairly different laws internally. It's only because of the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution that a lot of things get regulated. And people in the United States actually have very little consumer protections and should have a lot more. I don't know really though, honestly, what the refund policy in the United States is. I do know that Japanese companies are very controlling and crazy, and Nintendo is right at the top of the list of controlling and crazy companies. Speaking of Japanese companies, since apparently a YouTuber had over 150 videos removed from his YouTube channel because they had clips or screenshots of anime in them, and yeah, that is pretty much what I expected as far as how all of that went. Also, like Japanese companies pretty much hate anybody talking about their content at all. And honestly, it probably makes a decent argument for if you were trying to make your own website and you weren't just trying to do YouTube. Because, yeah, the YouTube anime reviewers are very few and far between and basically don't make any money at all. But if you really wanted to do it and you really wanted to use a lot of example images, I think you're at a certain point where just making an onion router website, something that is straight up just not accessible at all by the vast majority of internet goers, would be pretty much the only way to do it. And I don't even know if you could make a YouTube channel and then say, here, go to my onion website, and convince a lot of people to actually make that transition or protect yourself from DMCA style shutdown claims.
The truth lurks in the dark.
Already attacked, so I really don't have reason to evolve. Back to video game news. Insomniac defends making its Spider-Man No Way Home DLC suits PS5 only. The new outfits will be exclusive to the PS5 version of Spider-Man Remastered. This is like strike 2, if not 3 or 4, of Insomniac really just screwing over its fan base, of which they did such a good job of having and building a fan base as far as the Spider-Man games on PlayStation. Like, the Spider-Man games, if they were not on PlayStation, I don't know in the past 3 years if there's really even one other game worth mentioning or playing as far as an exclusive on PlayStation. And yet, probably in part, I don't want to shift the blame here, but I would suspect that Sony probably tried to negotiate for exclusives specifically on the PS5, which is a mistake on Jim Ryan's part, the guy in charge of the PlayStation now. If that's what really happened, this is all speculation. But I would assume they tried to negotiate for that, and Insomniac, who has to be the first line of blame here, failed their customer and failed to serve their product well by saying no, we will not agree to that term. And I don't know if Insomniac really has any leverage to negotiate for that, because Insomniac may very well have been 100% being funded by PlayStation for this exclusive anyways.
Destroy the world, artifacts.
Regardless, it's bad business on Insomniac's part. It's bad business on Sony's part. It could have easily been averted simply by Sony saying, no, we won't have any PS5 exclusives as far as DLC, particularly right now when it's so hard to get a PlayStation 5. Like, there's probably an argument that this has all been, this was all negotiated a long time ago before the shortage in the pandemic, and that would explain a lot. But the fact that this wasn't renegotiated or changed so that they would get rid of those exclusives is kind of crazy. The fact that they didn't see this coming, or they saw it coming and didn't care, is kind of crazy. Even if it wasn't a truth, and that PlayStation gamers or video gamers in general are just upset more than the average consumer of products they're fans of. Like, right now in the pandemic, I think every company probably needs to recognize that everybody's got their nerves on edge, and any even slightly perceived insult is going to be amplified. And so there is a lot of reason to make sure to bend over backwards and make the customers happy. But that doesn't seem like that's really what's happening. If anything, what's happening is we're seeing a lot more companies fire employees, piss off their customer base. They're just saying, what are you going to do about it? You've got no other options anyways. This may be a mini example of how consumerism and capitalism just hits that final part of late stage capitalism, where it's just like, screw you, we don't care. We've got your money for all these decades, and we've now gotten rid of all of our competition, so you don't have any choice. So we're just going to treat our employees badly. We're going to treat our customers badly. You definitely see that. Like, I'm sure on day one, Bell Southwest and Bell Southeast, which was the predecessor to AT&T as far as a phone company, I'm sure those phone companies on day one were doing really a lot of work to keep their customers happy and treat everyone nicely. But you kind of know now, AT&T, Verizon, the phone companies in general, they're not treating their customers right. They don't care. They probably particularly don't care about landline customers, but yeah, that happened over the course of 60, maybe 70 years, and it's happening even faster with a lot of companies nowadays.
So, you saw through me.
Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says the Uncharted Remasters gets a PlayStation 5 release date, graphics, pricing, and upgrade details. Which, okay. The thing I guess I would have to do if I was to actually get the Uncharted Remasters is play just the spin-off of the girl, because that's kind of a prequel, I think. I'd have to research this more. But yeah, if I was to just play that spin-off prequel game, then maybe you would have to wait years and years to get Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. Arguably, the thing that I may not be recognizing here is just how bad Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 would look until they do remaster it, or even if they did try to remaster it. I wouldn't be surprised if Uncharted 1 is using Unreal Engine like 2 or 3 and just shifting it up to Unreal Engine 4 is going to take a lot of work. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a limiting factor. Let's see, Video Games Chronicle says, Phil Spencer says he spends zero energy on console wars. He's more interested in helping the industry grow, which, that's an interesting idea, certainly. It just depends on your numbers as far as just, are you consistently making profits selling games and making more games? The second the Xbox becomes more like Nintendo, where Nintendo right now is making, I think, a lot more money selling their hardware than making games and selling games because they don't make that many games, then it becomes a different thing. Even though the Switch is the cheapest console, it's also probably the least financially good deal because of the fact that you're paying a higher premium for the Switch, I think, than you would for the Xbox if you could source out the parts and compare it. I've also seen a couple of slick deal sales where GameStop is offering a lot of trade-in cash for Xbox Series X's and Nintendo Switches. Like big amounts of cash, where the trade-in deals for used systems in the past have been particularly low, even though it is always been in-store credit. Anyways, which makes me only assume that there's a lot of demand for sales of used systems at GameStop, regardless of whether or not they're really going to see any sales or not. We really are a week, maybe a week and a half away from it being unreasonable to believe anybody is still shopping for Christmas, even though people tend to do last minute Christmas shopping. It's like, I don't know if there's a lot of that gonna happen. Phil Spencer also says he doesn't envision a time where every Xbox user subscribes to Game Pass. They're using like the same screenshot, Video Games Chronicles, each time. I feel like they should use different screenshots just to differentiate their pages. Xbox is celebrating the Halo launch day with artwork in London's Saatchi Gallery. A huge 6-meter wide art can be viewed in public for the next week. It's an interesting idea. I don't know why a museum would be willing to do that. Well, at a certain point, if a museum is willing to present someone's art, and you can pay an artist to do something. Do I seriously not have anything? Oh, should have done that one. It kind of smacks in the face of art as a general thing. Art is supposed to be useless. It's supposed to have nothing other than an intrinsic invoking of emotions and reactions in the viewers. You have crossed the line from art to advertisement when you are painting something to promote the release of a video game. There have been cases certainly where artists have been inspired by video games and had entire showings of video games. We've seen that definitely with music, maybe a lot more than even visual medium. But this clearly is advertisement. And I really don't think I can abide the idea of this becoming a new norm.
Flash of metal, a silent night.
Yeah. That is definitely something as an idea that rubs me the wrong way. And it would be different certainly if you hired an artist and you put it on a billboard where it is clearly labeled and shown as being an advertisement versus putting it in a museum. For this week, that space, there's a lot of square footage here where true art, better art, should be hanging.
Fulfills my existence.
And yeah, I can't agree with that. And if anything, it sends a message that Microsoft doesn't care about art or doesn't understand what art is, that they think it's perfectly fine to hang their advertisements like that. And it speaks very badly for the curator too. They would have really needed to have made a much larger justification than it seems like they did. And even if they did make a justification or an explanation, that's getting lost in the reporting. Let's see. Moving on, Call of Duty Warzone Mobile will be released in 2022, it's claimed, according to Video Games Chronicles. I don't think anybody's going to care by that point. It seems like nobody even cares about Call of Duty Warzone at all, the main game. A new Halo TV series teaser is released ahead of the Game Awards trailer reveal. This apparently is going to be a Paramount Plus original, which means nobody's going to see it. So you have this guy with a whole bunch of scars. Master Chief is supposed to be like really, really tall and really, really big. And questionable whether he's actually a human or would be considered a human at all by these standards. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually make him shorter than what canonically in the game they say he's supposed to be, because it's just really hard to... It's really, really hard to film somebody who's way taller than someone else. But yeah, that teaser trailer definitely did not show anything. And it is definitely questionable what that show could be. The standalone versions of Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacies have been delisted ahead of the PlayStation 5 Collector's Edition release. Which, yeah, that seems like the wrong way to run a business as far as the PlayStation Network. Which that's the only service that would have listed them. Like that again, I mean, you're kind of getting the same narrative over and over again with PlayStation. They're totalitarians. They're going to force you to do things the way they want to do it. People who just want to play Uncharted 4 no longer have that option. People who just want to purchase The Lost Legacy no longer have that option. That's not freedom, that's not choice, that's not offering options. It's one thing to say, hey, we've got this bundle, you see it on Steam all the time, we've got this bundle of these two games, but if you want to buy the game separately, we will let you. In almost, I would say, 89% of every case, that is how things are handled on Steam. You occasionally see a publisher that actively delists the original games, but most of the time when they delist the original game, it's not because they bundled it with a better version. They've delisted it because they are now releasing and selling a remastered version. And it becomes hard to believe that there's actually licensing issues. I've heard zero talk of Uncharted 4 Lost Legacy bundle changing music or anything like that. And since this would just be Sony as the publisher, working with Sony's own company, I don't think there'd really be I don't think there would be really any licensing problems there. I guess when it rains it pours for the team executor member Gary Bowser, Switch hacker. He has now been fined a second time for $10 million on top of a $4.5 million fine. At this point, I think he knows what he's doing. He's just going to go bankrupt, and Nintendo's never going to see anything like this. So he basically, if I'm reading this right, they were facing a long prison sentence. They instead offered to pay $4.5 million as well as help them find other members of the team. So then the prosecution agreed to waive all charges as a result. And then I think the idea here was that they were going to get them to waive the charges so he doesn't end up in jail, and then agree to any ridiculous amount of money, and then never actually pay any of the money. But it still feels like he could get up to 10 years in prison if the judge decides to throw him in prison. And at a certain point, I think a judge could find him in contempt of court. So yeah. The bigger problem with this kind of ridiculous amounts of money is that it creates this unrealistic precedent. Certainly. Because if you really run the numbers here, they're saying he ran a ROM libraries that included 13,630 games. I guarantee you, Nintendo in particular has never made 13,630 games. Like, if you take the entirety of the Nintendo library from beginning to end, they have not made anywhere close to that number of games. I would say you're probably leaning somewhere closer to, I'll be generous and say 800 games actually owned by Nintendo. And so that is another number that is just getting buffed up. Certainly. And other companies obviously would have to sue him for violation of their copyrights. And other companies don't care. You're also making a ridiculous claim here that old NES games, or even brand new games, 13,000 of them somehow equals not even $4.5 million, which is just not realistic at all. $60 game times 10,000. That's $600,000 as far as the value. You would have to then try and make an argument that of that $600,000, each game was downloaded by, each one of those games was downloaded by at least 8 people. Wouldn't that be about right? Yeah, at least 5 people. Let's make it easy to get to 3 million. So yeah, about 8 people. At a full price of $60 games, that's not realistic. And you, on top of that, I think should be required to prove that of each of those 8 people for each of those 13,000 games, what they were actually going to buy those games, or even had the opportunity to buy these games. And, well, I can certainly see why certain people would say, well, if these were Switch games that they were putting ROMs up for, that's a little bit worse than if these were NES games. There really legally isn't much difference.
Oh, come on!
And probably should be a consideration there. It would be interesting, certainly, if there was a law that says, for every year this game has not been available for purchase, you lose a percentage of your claims that you can claim on it. You lose, like, for every year it's not available for sale, you lose 5%, then another 5%, another 5%. 20 years after a game has not been available for purchase legitimately from a company, it's 0 damages. And frankly should be public domain. I'd say even 10 years after something's not been available for sale, it should be public domain. Let's look at some games. We have Shadow Tactics, Aiko's Choice, which is rated very positively. So I think we have to put this on the follow list. English and Japanese full audio, $17.99. I mean, we'll put it on the wish list, actually. The only thing I guess that could happen here is I could realize that actually Shadow Tactics as a series doesn't exist. It does, though. Here you have overwhelmingly positive games. So, yeah. I don't know how many of these Shadow Tactics games I'd really want to play. I'd have to do more investigation as to what the game is. Even. Hit this one. Hit this one.
I'm gonna rest for a bit.
Do this one. And do that one.
How uncouth! I shall not grieve.
Scatter like
Let's go ahead and evolve here.
My blade melt under my touch.
You have summoned the Blade of Purgation here.
This is kind of the best scenario for Shadowverse, where you have a Knight of Purgation in your hand and a one that you can summon. Let's see, here we have a game called Hellcoming, which looks like it's an online co-op Ghost Hunter game. We're seeing more of these. $4.49, several languages, single player with online co-op.
I'll see you in Purgatory.
Here we have a game called Defender's Glory, which looks like a tower defense game, and we can dismiss. $13.49, English only. Here we have Carl's Cookie Warehouse, which looks like a clone of a very old game. Free to play, English only. I guess the price is right. If you told me this was a student project, I might consider it, but even at that, it looks pretty awful. So I think I'd have to say no.
I'm the most fabulous demon of them all. Out of the way! Out of the way! Come on!
Let's see, we have a game on Steam here called Love 3, which looks like nothing. $9.99, whole bunch of languages. Here we have Crimson Clover World Explosion, which is just a shoot 'em up bullet hell game, which I'm not a fan of those. They're too visually busy. $17.99, whole bunch of languages. Speaking of like visual busyness, while my eyes haven't really hurt too much lately since I've basically taken 2 weeks off of as far as playing video games, I have consistently only had half as many lights on in my bedroom. So I'm wondering if this is potentially just the new normal, and I may very well never again have as bright of lights as I once did, which might be a good thing, frankly. I may have been just literally blinding myself with overly bright lights. Because I basically have like 4 100-watt equivalent bulbs turned on. So 400-watt bulbs, that's more than the 60-watt bulbs, the 80-watt bulbs you're supposed to have in a 4-socket ceiling light fixture. And yep, it's not like I was wearing sunglasses or anything, so I could have just been blowing out my own retinas, for lack of a better term.
Hey, let's play. It's a chance for a grand slam. Hey, let's play. It's a chance for a grand slam.
Let's see, here we have another shoot 'em up called Castle Shikigami 2, which same things apply. Looks like Dagashi is just publishing a bunch of either new or old shoot 'em up games. $17.99, English and Japanese. I wouldn't be surprised if these are old that are just finally getting English interface translations and probably very little else. Here we have a Silo Sybil Infinite Runner game. I might have considered this if it didn't look just like an Infinite Runner and if it didn't have fairly bad low polygon imagery. Like, if you told me this came out before like the Banjo-Kazooie game or around the time of Banjo-Kazooie, I might have considered it, but it's early access. It's $15.29. It's a brand new game. There's no reason for the graphics to be this bad. Okay.
A flash of metal, a silent night.
I think I can win here.
Oh, come on! Whoa, you're strong.
Which that's certainly nice. If we have, by accomplishing very little, we have managed to accomplish all the daily quests.
My blade has paid your
That
passage
does
into the
leave us in a
afterlife.
nice position where we really don't have anything else to do, worry about. That being said, it seems like the new daily missions start in just a few minutes, so let's go back home, start multiplayer, start playing ranked. Pick that and go. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Call of Duty Warzone's kernel level anti-cheat driver rolls out to PC players. The next step in the Ricochet project is to let games access the rest of the PC to detect cheat software. Yeah. I don't know how you don't call that a rootkit. I think by definition it literally is a rootkit. And yeah. I don't think there's any game out there that it's worth taking that risk to the security of your overall PC to make it worth playing. Certainly, like, I really wouldn't trust anybody Anybody who wants that kind of power is not trustworthy enough to have that kind of power. Frankly. I would much prefer to play any other game. Because the thing about cheating, though, is as much as people complain about cheating, particularly in online games, people make do. People play games that have cheaters in them, and they complain about cheating, and half the complaining, I think probably more than half of the complaining about cheaters is actually illegitimate complaints where the other player is just not really cheating at all. There are cheaters out there, certainly, but I think if you're going to have to go to these extremes, it's very much like the police state argument that we always need to give more funds to the police department. We always need to, because there's always these crimes or increases in crimes, because often they've just manipulated the numbers to make it look like there's an increase in crime. Whereas there was a thing on Reddit just yesterday talking about how people say, oh, you'll love the police when you get robbed, and the rebuttal to that is like, I've known several people who have gotten robbed and the police were never there on time, and they just took notes and then did absolutely nothing about it. Never found the stolen items. Yeah, I guess personally I know people who have been robbed and police reports have been filed and they never find the culprits or recover any of the missing items. So, yeah. The idea that the police are a deterrent to any crime is often very untrue. Sometimes, sure. It makes sense that there would be some police in a stadium full of people getting drunk watching a football game or something like that. It would be kind of crazy to have no security in a big conglomeration of a lot of people who are together in a weird way like that. It kind of makes sense to have police at parades. It kind of makes sense to have police patrolling in general areas, not particularly racially profiling areas or economically profiling areas, but the threat that you might get caught does kind of make some sense, but there is a big gap between police at a parade just to help out and then police in full SWAT riot gear looking to violate the First Amendment rights of the people protesting at a protest.
The horizon gives me inspiration.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how I got onto that rant. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says Horizon Zero Dawn PC patch adds DLSS and AMD FSR upscaling, which I guess makes a good argument to potentially have not played Horizon Zero Dawn up until this point, and kind of makes an argument that you should never play any game until it's ported to PC and has been given several patches. Looking at this trailer in particular, you're seeing a lot more action, but even on a individual screenshot aspect, there's just way more color going on. There's way more to Aloy's, I think that's her name, outfit. It's just like God of War may have a better story, but visually it looks bad, and that's not something I think that I really would have complained about in the previous era of God of War games. So there's also some performance improvements in this update. Let's see. Well, if we do this, and then we do this.
I'm already a proper lady, you know.
That worked out well. See, Video Games Chronicles says the first Sonic 2 movie poster was released ahead of a new trailer at the Game Awards. Seems like a lot of stuff is leaking out for the Game Awards. This looks fine. Honestly, we may hit a point here where Sonic really starts to succeed very well as a movie series, so much so that we kind of stop seeing Sonic even from the lens of being a video game character, where honestly I don't think Sonic has succeeded greatly as a video game character. Okay, I guess I have to play this. So we can do that.
Done for.
Kaboom! No handiwork needed.
Then we'll play that to reduce that.
Perennial prayer has come.
We'll play that. Maybe we shouldn't have played that. Yeah, we shouldn't have. Let's see. Phil Spencer believes Kinect was one of Xbox's biggest contributions to gaming. It helped expand awareness of accessibility, is what he's saying. That is really putting on some rosy colored glasses to look back at the Kinect. If anything, I would say the Kinect probably helped raise the idea of having a camera look at people, which arguably for video game consoles would have been a bridge too far, and is still a bridge too far for a lot of people. But yeah, I could definitely see the idea that the PlayStation Eye would have maybe flopped a little bit more, and thus PlayStation VR would have flopped a little bit more had the Kinect not existed. That being said, I think it completely is still a flop, and it's not like the Kinect ever got anywhere close to enabling a system where people who just cannot even hold a control and maybe just have nubs and no hands or fingers could play video games. Like, there was never any real level of accessibility to that extent. So, yeah. It definitely kind of feels disingenuous to phrase it that way, and if anything, it just kind of highlights how Phil Spencer, like most managers, are kind of BS artists first and foremost. Let's see, Walmart Plus members will be able to buy PS5 consoles on Wednesday. According to Video Games Chronicles, we're still getting this. GTA Online is adding story DLC this month featuring Dr. Dre, new music, and more. That's interesting.
I'll scorch you as black as these skies.
No!
I'm gonna show my ignorance here and go, I know this isn't Dr. Dre. And I think this isn't Dr. Dre. But in all fairness, I wouldn't be able to tell you if this or this is supposed to be Dr. Dre. But maybe Dr. Dre as a character doesn't actually show up. It's nice to see them adding content to the universe of GTA. Arguably established gangster rappers who
End of the
aren't
road, eh?
really gangsters by
Done.
modern standards or these days. I'd assume Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre are not out there with any real threat of doing any real crimes. I've just got too many cameras on them. It does kind of play into some negative stereotypes, but I mean, also somewhat true stereotypes.
I envy you.
What sucks more, I would say, though, is the fact that this is just online story DLC, which you could almost see an argument towards the idea of... I didn't really need to come back out here to check this. Yeah, this is an hour and 24 minutes. This is not anytime soon, not a minute and 24 seconds. Yeah, I could almost see the argument of having an online game as service, adding DLC through just monthly subscriptions or whatever it costs to play GTA. Even if it's free to play, we know there's microtransactions still funding that.
Enhance.
And then taking a year's worth of expansions on this online service and then selling that, reselling that, remastering it, as a single player experience. But I don't think they're going to do that, unfortunately. Somebody has copyrighted the phrase engage kill, but it's all in Japanese, and I forgot which company it was. It was either like Square Enix or somebody like that. Like, ideally, that would be the case. Certainly you'd want for all games and services. Like, we've seen a little bit of that with World of Warcraft, where they're doing these legacy servers and then kind of just leaving the gameplay on those legacy servers alone. And I don't think they're ever really intending on having their legacy servers go to the next expansions. But even in that case, you still are taking an MMO and just releasing old versions of the MMO. You're not converting it to a single player experience. I'm not sure any game has ever converted something that was an online experience. And I'd only ever even suggest or consider that in the fact that particularly GTA feels like GTA Online feels like a game that really should just be a single player game, not a multiplayer game. Next we have a game on Steam here called Save. It looks like it's a mobile game, low effort thing from China. Early access $14.99, English and Chinese. Here we have a game called Rescue Helicopter, which doesn't look like much of anything. There was an old game where you would play as a helicopter trying to rescue people in a flat 2D plane. So making kind of a modern version of that isn't the worst thought ever, but you definitely need to put a lot of polish to it, and you probably need to cram in some kind of story to it. It looks like this whole city is just floating, sinking into the ocean. 59 cents, English only. This is kind of the example of a game where a gameplay mechanic might be slightly interesting, but you probably would need 2 more gameplay mechanics. I could see being a helicopter pilot, landing, and then having to like defend an area when zombies are attacking while the survivors get on the plane, or you helicopter from point A to point B and then you're in a region and you do some kind of Metroidvania 3D investigation. I could see the idea of being a helicopter paramedic and just like really trying to save people and not really even having to fight too many people, just occasional people that are gone crazy due to the pandemic. That would make some sense too.
you some shine yourself.
But just flying around is not quite enough. It's a lot. It feels a lot like if you could have controlled the bathyspheres in BioShock. Would that really have made BioShock a better game if you had to manually control where you were going and could end up very far away from the region? I don't think it really would have. Here we have a game on Steam called Labyrinth of Death, which looks like it's just a kind of dungeon crawler, platformer, 2D it says. I don't think really it's a platformer so much. It's just kind of avoiding traps in a top-down dungeon game. $7.79 English full audio. As I'm thinking about potentially making a macro to change these pages, I really would fail miserably on step 1 if I can't get a way for these pages to automatically reconfigure themselves. Like, the macros generally don't run just because a tab opens. And as far as UI vision, you have to have either a hotkey or you have to click a button. And if I'm having to click a button, I don't think it's really going to be worth it. Like, theoretically, I'd have to like come up to the bar and click something and then come back, and I might as well just scroll down at that point, and I'd forget it so often. Okay. Evolve.
You were done for.
Play. Let's see.
The horizon gives me inspiration.
But it was just a game.
Let's see. Here we have a game called Princess Sarah Adventures, which just looks like a generic platformer. $7.79 English only. Here we have Restaurant Solitaire Delicious Lunch, which looks like nothing of quality. $2.99 English, French, German, and Russian. Here we have a game called Stop-O Cop, which looks like a top-down twin-stick shooter.
Now the fight begins. Zimmer is never over.
$5.99 English and Russian. Doesn't look like anything. Here we have Hacking Ball 3D, which looks like nothing. And as we get closer to the end of the year, that's all we're really going to see. It's just a whole bunch of garbage games, I think. Throne and Crown, another example of nothing of interest. $8.99 English only. Here we have Frontier Pilot Simulator, which looks like nothing. $22.49.
I'll be back.
Here we have a game called 18 Korea, which... do you want to simulate the events of the Korean War? Like, I don't think a lot of people would as a tabletop game. Like, those scars definitely run deep, particularly in the Asian Pacific countries. $16.39 English and Korean. I just don't see. I don't think there's a reason why you would want to play this. It's an online multiplayer game also, so you're going to have fairly limited experiences. Alright, do this. Do this. Do this.
The real battle begins.
Why is it the string is so pricey?
Let's see. Gamatsu says Galgun Double Piece is coming to the Switch on March 17th, 2022. Currently available for the PS4, PS Vita, and PC. I don't think Galgun Double Piece went quite as extreme, so I don't think there was ever really any censorship around it. It also kind of came out slightly before the censorship, around the PS4 in particular, and PlayStation in general just started happening. So I suspect this probably is the exact same version. Galgun. As a series, lewd anime girls, you're shooting with your love guns. I don't think it gets particularly extremely explicit. It may very well only show underwear. I know that Double Peace, being kind of like the sequel of the series, didn't have anywhere as terrible of the microtransactions that the first game had, which that has been definitely a limiting factor as to my interest in playing the original game, is that there's just a ridiculous amount of DLC for outfits and an odd DLC that lets you either increase the bust size of all the characters or decrease the bust size of all characters, but once you buy it you can't undo it, which seems just kind of insane that that's how you do it, and you can't buy both DLCs and have it do anything. There's also, I think, the Galgun Pixies game. And I would say Galgun as a series probably benefited heavily by being covered by like YouTubers. So I don't think Double Peace got covered by as many YouTubers as YouTube started cracking down on things that were more lewd. And if you get away from the lewdness, it's kind of pointless to play the game, but it's not like you have a lot of on-rail shooter games, and that's what it is. So you might potentially get into a weird position where if somebody is looking to play an on-rail shooter game and I had to make a recommendation, the Galgun series is like the most recent game I think I could suggest as far as an on-rail shooter. And that's crazy to say the least. It shouldn't be the case. There should be some other on-rail shooters.
I'm already a proper lady, you know. Gonna have to fix myself up. Let us conclude.
Let's see.
I've got all the magic Is that how you treat a lady?
Impossible.
Moving on, Gametsu says Legend of Mana Remaster is now available for iOS and Android. Let's see. Do I have an actual clock? I have a clock, but it's constantly wrong. But I guess the time thing has had it.
I've got this under control. Tales of Crestoria is going to end service on February 7th, 2022. Mobile Tales to shut down after a year and a half, which that does not speak well for the Tales series, which is weird, but it does seem like it's fairly common for some of these Japanese companies to make mobile version spin-offs of their series and kind of slightly drag their AAA titles' names through the mud by associating it with poorly supported, at the very least, mobile games. Let's see, we already talked about Uncharted Legacy of Thieves launching January 28th for PC and PS5. Serious Sam 4 is now available for PS5 and Xbox Series, which I guess that means it's been ported up. Serious Sam 4 first launched on PC September 24, 2020. Console versions have yet to be officially announced, and yet they just, I guess, sneaked it out there without really announcing it, which at a certain point maybe Serious Sam is one of those series that doesn't have a lot going for it, so there is a decent reason to not waste a lot of advertising around something that it has its fan base, but that's about it. It's not likely to sell to people who don't know what the Serious Sam series is about as a hectic first-person shooter. A hand-drawn 2D Metroidvania called After Image has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC, due out late in 2022. Which, the thumbnail looks interesting. The rest of the screenshots look nice, certainly. Nice and colorful, more in an open world compared to being in dungeons, which you tend to see a lot of in Metroidvanias. Let's look at this blurry trailer. Let's see if it actually shows us anything. This has gotten to be a cliche at this point, where you just show a character running and fade between a whole bunch of different backgrounds. At a certain point, it's starting to just show that there's going to be a lot of running in the game, which it does definitely feel like that there's more platforming in this environment, being fairly zoomed out than you would expect in your average Castlevania game, where you're fighting more enemies and the rooms are smaller. And that might very well be a case where, interesting to have a different trailer for Steam. It might very well be a case where being in smaller rooms and more constricted is a smart move for, I need to actually play, for the likes of Metroidvania games. Keep them more constricted in smaller areas. Here we have a game on Steam called Dungeon Death, which is more in that feeling, but visually it looks pretty bad. $6.59 English Russian, nothing there of interest. Here we have a game called Among the Zombies, which we really haven't seen a low polygon zombie first person shooter game in a while. And maybe this is supposed to be an Among Us name confusion game. Honestly, for nostalgia reasons, I have this slight twinge to put this on the fall list, but when reality settles back into my mind, that's ridiculous. Even this Big Ogre is a step in the right direction. That being said, $6.59 English and Russian, you would definitely have to take about 100 steps forward. You'd have to get away from the low polygon, or you'd have to show me just a ton of environments and gameplay, something that really made me feel like you're actively and intentionally sticking with a already besmirched art style just so you can just so that you can, I don't even know what you would be trying to do. Like sticking with low polygon as an art style is really just a suicide attempt as far as game development is concerned in my mind. Here we have a game called Mega Zombie Explosion, which is not low polygon, but still looks like an asset flip first person shooter. $5.99 English only. Here we have a game called Monsters Per Second, which looks like it's probably a tower defense game of sorts. Otherwise, even if it isn't that, it doesn't particularly look like anything that would interest me. Early access $13.49 English and German. Okay. Do this.
Smiles are the best medicine.
Oh, shoot. I screwed that up terribly. I thought I was going to keep him alive for one more turn. But I didn't. I thought I was going to keep him alive and then play the unicorn. They heal the guy back up.
Useless puppets get
I don't know if what I'm doing right now even will help me.
Got this under control.
Because this guy seems to be building up his health as much as he's losing his health. And he's got more cards than I do.
This is merely the beginning. That you carry out.
Here we have a game called Exit 2, which we can immediately dismiss. Free, English, German.
Stop!
We have a game called Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator, which is far too green for its own good, which I'll have to dismiss. $16.99, way too expensive also, several languages. Here we have a game called White Shadows, which there might be something to this. It's more 3D than you would expect. It's got a lot more background and art going to this. I'm not a huge fan at this point with games that are very much in black and white silhouette, but this definitely feels more like a lighting game and a silhouette game than just a game that didn't want to put any color into their art style. So I'm going to put this on the follow list. $17.99, a whole bunch of languages supported. Frankly, I'm a little bit surprised that I've been able to even find any game today that is of worthwhile of talking about. Let's see, Gamatsu says Tencent Games has established a high-quality games brand called Level Infinite, which
Running is always an
you
option.
see several images of games here, but I don't recognize any of them. Not really. This looks like Don't Starve. This might be League of Legends. I think this is some kind of vampire game. Let's see. Arena of Valor, Don't Starve New Home, Synced Off Planet, Lightspeed, and a Quantum Studios title, and a Teamy Studio Group title, or titles. Also Conan Chop Chop, GTFO, Metal Hellsinger, Warhammer 40k, Darktide, Warhammer Vermintide 2, Vampire the Masquerade, Blood Hunt. So a lot of these games have already been announced or come out, and they've just been put under a new brand, which arguably maybe admits that Tencent as a company has some brand recognition issues or name recognition problems. Guess we play this. If only I could have evolved that. Let's see. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl has a free DLC character of Garfield being announced throughout December 9th.
I envy you.
I guess maybe Nickelodeon owns Garfield at this point. I don't really think so. They probably still have to license it from Jim Davis. It'd be kind of crazy for me not to have heard of Garfield being bought by Nickelodeon. I know Ninja Turtles, though, was bought by Nickelodeon, so it also isn't insane to think that maybe Nickelodeon has been very good about buying out some of the more independent but well-known and well-liked characters without it making a lot of news press.
Activate. Enhance. Fire.
At the end of the day, you really can't make an argument that Nickelodeon is anywhere close to being a monopoly as far as cartoon characters, when you have Disney being the de facto monopoly as far as cartoon characters, and Cartoon Network also having competition there. And you also have Netflix and any other streaming service potentially improving or making their own content. Also, Famitsu's review scores for issue 1723 out. They gave Battlefield 2042 32 out of 40, Farming Simulator 30 out of 40, so not a good score considering how many people I think bought it. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl has gotten a 34 out of 40, so I'm glad people like that. And then Record of Low Sword Deadlit and Wonderland Labyrinth is 33 out of 40. So not a lot of variety here between the scores when you get down to it. Like 34 really just 1 point above Record of Low Sword, just 2 points above Battlefield 2042. If anything, it highlights even in a fairly trusted review score such as Famitsu, which I think kind of deserves to be trusted as a review score site. Even in that case, a 10-point scale divided by 4 different reviewers really just averages out to everything being about 33.
I've got this under control.
Let's see. Matsu also says Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have sales of top 6 million. Which it is 2 slightly different games, a girl version and a boy version basically. Which they really need to stop doing that. There really would have been a great argument to, instead of making Shield and Sword, just releasing a game called Pokemon Shield and Sword where you could pick the main character and not try and double dip. The era of being able to get away with that is kind of crazy.
Verifying access.
Yeah, I'm gonna just end the turn here. That would have probably helped your sales quite a bit as just an advertisement point to say, hey, we're gonna get away from releasing 2 games and instead just release all the Pokemon in one game and have a boy and girl option. Moving on, Gamatsu says the top-down puzzle adventure game One Shot is coming to PS4, Xbox One, and Switch in 2022. I think we've heard about this game, but maybe not a lot. Looking at these screenshots, I'm not really seeing much of a game. Seems like you're a character holding a glowing orb, and it seems like this trailer is just going to have it talking to you the whole time. Yeah. Didn't really feel like there was much to that trailer. Let's see if this works.
All of you.
Oh, guinea pigs, where are you?
Let's see. Saber Interactive is going to showcase 5 upcoming titles during the Game Awards 2021 and Twitch Winter Game, which again is an announcement for an announcement, so it's not very useful information. Arcade Paradise has a games, and more games trailer, which...
A good guinea pig.
Okay. There definitely was a question as to some of these games that look like retro games releases, whether there would be enough of them to justify buying a bundle.
It's under control.
And yeah, that looks like that's more games than what I've seen as far as arcade simulators go, and that's pretty much what I would describe that as. Just at first glance.
Terminal. Activate dimensional startup. Commencing transmission.
Okay. But
Running
this...
is always an option.
Here we have a game on Steam called Heavenly Bodies. Heavenly Bodies. Kind of feels like
Destroy the world artifacts.
it's some kind of space walk simulator physics game.
Sleep mode.
Yeah, it's kind of like a QWOP in space. It's rated very positively. I'm not sure this is really a game I would want to control. In a lot of ways, I could see it giving me flashbacks to like Kerbal Space Program, where you're just messing up and dying over and over again. And maybe I just don't have a good enough sense of humor about my own frustrations in games. When I do have frustrations in games, then maybe I can't just make a joke of the idea of failing. $17.99, 13 languages it says. I'll put it on the follow list though. I'll definitely consider it. But yeah, I would be cautious, to say the least. This
What
one,
fine threads you have.
and then this,
This'll be over quick.
and then
What fine
this,
threads you have.
and then this,
This'll be over quick.
and then this,
Knowledge fulfills my existence.
and then evolve.
Begin.
Is that all you have to show? Let us learn together.
Here we have a game on Steam called Wolfstride, which is tagged as Anime Max Combat Action.
You're through.
It's an amateur grown-up RPG about a trio of troublemakers. This has got quite the intro, but I don't know if there's enough of a game here, or if it's just a lot of flash. $13.49, English, allegedly full audio, several other languages. I'll put this on the follow list. We'll see what reviews say. This is definitely one of those games where general public opinion would help guide me. Here we have Asterix and Obelix Slap Them All, which I feel like this was either a game announced nearly a year ago or a game that's being re-released, maybe to avoid negative reviews, which it's not really succeeding well for that. $22.49 is probably way too expensive. German, French, and English. Knowing Asterix and Obelix's origin, that makes a little bit of sense. Yeah. I'm going to put this on the follow list, but I also think there's room to investigate why. Is this a new game at all, or is this just a re-release of an old game? There are no settings, no controls, no audio video. The only language is English. Visuals are awesome, but the game itself sucks. Don't get fooled by the trailer and visuals. I feel pity for the art team. They did an amazing job while the rest of the team sat on their hands. Very repetitive overall gameplay. I wouldn't be surprised And see, this is one of those cases where they're saying over and over again that the art looks good. Wouldn't be surprised if this is just a beat 'em up game where you're just pressing like one button over and over and over again. And maybe if they had made it a bit more obvious that that's what it is, and you had just kept it way cheaper, you would have gotten better results there. That is something that definitely feels like an example of, if you're not careful about who you license to, if you don't make a good presentation of your product, you create this scenario where Asterix and Obelix could have been a game that was very popular even in the West, where it wasn't known very much as a comic in the United States. It still could have been a good game that would have brought in a lot of people, and had you done that decades prior, you probably would have had an entire series of Asterix and Obelix games. Which there is, I guess, a couple of other Asterix and Obelix games out there, but it's hardly to the level of Halo Infinite, or Halo games. And in a lot of cases, you have things like Mass Effect, where the people that created the idea and own the idea are still not the right people to be in charge of the game, and they managed to bone it up by the third game. And then really managed to mess it up as far as Andromeda was concerned. Let's see, we have a game here called Gear Club Unlimited 2 Ultimate Edition. Looks like a racing game, doesn't look so terrible that I can dismiss it. $31.49, several languages. We'll put that on the follow list. We have a game called Unstrong Space Calamity, which looks like probably not anything I'm interested in. But maybe there's a kid-friendly 3D platforming game in here. It does seem to have more visual polish than average. I'll put this on the follow. $3.99 English and German. It might be too short or too simplistic for a 3D adventure platformer. We have something called Creatures Docking Station, which looks like it's a very alien docking station in space, life sim. But then there's a DLC here called Creatures 3 that's $5.99, and then 2 other free DLCs. Which definitely makes me feel like this is kind of a bait and switch game. There's also this game called Creatures Village, which came out on December 20th and looks very different. I think I'm gonna say no to Creatures Docking Station. Just doesn't feel like it's treating people on the up and up, and definitely feels like it's trying to pull a fast one. Okay.
I'm already a proper lady, you know.
Well, this ain't ideal, is it?
I'm watching the trailer for Creatures just to see if maybe there was something different there that would change my mind, but no. Here we have something called Mizu, which really just looks like an asset flip game. Early access, $4.99 English only. Looks like he's holding a gun and pointing it towards the camera. You actually don't see that much in games. This might be a skateboard, actually. Like, it's actually kind of strange. We don't see more of that, but then I bet you can't make a cover for a game that has cover art that has a gun pointing towards the purchaser in a like Walmart or something like that. I bet that in general is not allowed. I bet there's a kind of long list of things that are just not allowed like that. And people, either through common sense, have been figured that out, or in some other way have been told that those kinds of things wouldn't be allowed.
You're done for.
That. Next we have a game on Steam called Escape Logan Escapes. Escape Logan Estate, which honestly looks fairly nicely animated for what is an escape the room game. It feels like it's really trying to do it in a different way. I think it deserves a follow because of that. $3.39 English, allegedly full audio. Let's put that on the follow list. Kind of describing itself as an adventure puzzle mystery point and click. I'm probably playing too much Shadowverse and not covering enough news. Here we have SGS Operation Hawaii, which looks like it's a turn-based strategy war game. It doesn't look terrible, but I think at this point I'm pretty well decided I'm not going to play any like tabletop military simulation games.
Enhance. Fire.
$8.99, bunch of languages. Here we have Hoguru presents The House with Too Many Zombies in It, which looks like a low effort game, top-down twin-stick shooter game. And I feel like this HOG Guru is going to start just releasing a whole bunch of games with Hoguru presents or HOG presents. $2.67 English, allegedly full audio. Here we have Polygon Hunter, which looks just like an asset flip shooter. $19.99 English only. Here we have a game called There You Are, which interestingly I think might be a bit of a point and click adventure game with more of a 3D model concept to it. I like the art style because it is definitely very different. So I'm going to put it on the follow list just for that reason. 99 cents English only. Could be short. It could be really, really short and not worth the 99 cents. So that's why we need to check for that. This might be a student project and it might fail. If it is a student project, actually, though, I would probably want to cover it just because of the nice art style. Here we have Rune Factory 4 Special, which I wonder if that means there isn't a Rune Factory 4 on Steam.
Do not seek what is not there.
Which, yeah. In a lot of ways, if I am going to play anything that's like a Stardew Valley game, I think Rune Factory probably would be the better attempt on that. And arguably, even when Stardew Valley came out, there may very well have been a Rune Factory 3 that was available to compare it to, and just Western reviewers didn't actually cover it. I guess the real thing to question here would be, when was the last Rune Factory game released on Steam, if ever? They also have Story of Seasons, which is a game I more ignored. I wouldn't be surprised if Rune Factory is a bit more action, where Stories of Seasons is a little bit less action. And you can take your pick as far as just how much games you want. But then there's also Doraemon Story of Seasons, which is different than just Story of Seasons, and Fate Extella, which I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Fate games sales happen, because the Fate series is fairly well beloved. Okay, I can see the beginning of the end, which is good.
100% straight and 0 spin in a twirl and out.
Let's see, Gamatsu says Astroneer for Switch launches January 13th alongside a xenobiology update. Let's see if I can remind myself which one is Astroneer, because there's quite a few space games. This is the one, I believe, where your oxygen runs out if you don't place oxygen vents fairly close to you, and you have to upgrade your backpack a lot. Perhaps through upgrades they've stopped focusing on that so much. It's maybe an attempt at doing something that is slightly like Minecraft without feeling exactly like Minecraft, or just feeling like a Minecraft rip-off clone.
The time for perennial prayer has come. Rejoice!
You were done for.
Let's see.
A fitting end.
And smack that, I guess. A remastered version for the PlayStation 5, I believe. No, it seems to be PS4 of the Blood Dragon DLC, or the standalone version of Blood Dragon, I think has been announced for the Japanese PlayStation Store. Again, this is another one of these cases where it's all in Japanese, and so I'm clicking on too many of these links that don't really help me much because I don't read Japanese. We already talked about God of War's PC features trailer. Like Gamatsu has that same article too. And then that jumps us into the GameDevelopers.com articles. They have the IGF, which is their same parent company owns, juries. I guess that's how you spell juries in plural. I'd almost assume you would spell it with a Y.
Running is always an option.
But yeah, they have the juries for the Audio, Visual, and Student Game Awards at the Game Developer Conference of 2022. Raven Software's QA team is walking out after the surprise layoffs. Which, yeah, the layoff like 20 people. Now there was a thing on Reddit where a guy laid off like 15% of all their workforce and over a Zoom meeting. But yeah, 20 people really wouldn't have been too much, I think, had they just told them ahead of time or made it feel like they weren't going to renew a contract. Like 20 people is why you have managers in the first place, to lay off people. You didn't even have to do it like as one big group. You could have told 20 separate managers, assuming you have 20 separate managers, to pick 20 people and lay them off. And just say, this is just you, I mean, you basically should fire them instead of laying them off. You could easily have said, we went by seniority and we just laid off the newest employees. And nobody would have probably complained, although people do seem to be very irate at this point, so maybe they would have complained even in that case, but it seems like they've found the absolute worst way to possibly lay off a incredibly, relatively speaking, small number of people, and now they've got hundreds upon hundreds of people walking out. in solidarity, which is a good thing for employees, I guess, at a certain point. And it would be nice and fun to imagine a world where nobody got laid off in particular. They only got fired for cause, for bad performance.
It's time you got a taste of your own despair.
Of course, the legitimacy of bad performance complaints is always in question in jobs.
Now, to exact my
But yeah.
vengeance.
There was also a big strike that was already ongoing, and the company offered them a 3% wage increase, which they said no, that's not good enough. And now they're saying they're just going to replace all of those people permanently with scabs, for lack of scabs is the right term. Of course, there is a real question as to where they're going to get these fictional replacement employees for this. I think it was a Kellogg cereal factory. But yeah, that is pretty much your standard negotiating tactic, is to try to bring in scabs or replace people with scabs when you're trying to not actually negotiate in good faith with the union. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Ubisoft says handling of the misconduct crisis has eroded trust. The quote here is, "I don't think we always communicated enough back to the people who had raised an issue in the first place." Which, the title and the quote kind of out of line. Like, not the exact thing here. This is a great example where there should just be Ubisoft says, quote, this, instead of recontextualizing it or putting some yellow journalism or some propaganda in it. And I can't help but, even from that title, just assume that GameDeveloper.com is still very much likely to be coming from a impartial angle as far as this story and any story about Ubisoft, really. They've been consistently writing stories when there really was no news to report at all. And consistently siding with one side versus being an impartial observer. And it really has made GameDeveloper.com look incredibly biased and stupid, because the side they're siding with has failed horribly in court cases, and their stories have failed horribly to really convince the average gamer. Like, if you ask the average gamer what's the deal with Ubisoft, they would say, oh, nothing, they just make a bunch of Assassin's Creed games, and they're pretty good, but the most recent Assassin's Creed game maybe had a little too much grinding in it in DLC. Like, there would be no talk whatsoever about a story of somebody making some inappropriate photos, copying, pasting heads on the porn stars' bodies, and then the IT department getting irate because they were demanding that person be fired and they weren't fired, and then the IT department refusing to do their job, and then the IT department getting fired, which that's, to my understanding, what the story is, and it's the thing that's not being talked about at all, because it doesn't stand up against its own weight as far as being a legitimate reason to stop doing your work.
Let us conclude.
And at a certain point, if the French unions, which I think do exist in Ubisoft's case, really were irate about this, they would have actually gone on strike, and they're not even getting that level of support. which I think shows you something. Like, one thing about unions is you can't, as a union head, as a union leader, you can't let your entire union get into multiple strikes over multiple times because a single employee feels like something is wrong. It is very much a group thing, and if you can't convince members of a union to get together and vote to strike, then the mob rule, the group negotiation really has to end at that point. Like, unions can't be the personal playthings, for lack of a better term, of a single person. And sometimes they do become that, unfortunately, when the person who is upset is powerful within the union also. But that's not the case in Ubisoft. That's just a general idea. Back to the previous story, Treyarch Q&A employees have joined the Raven Software and other developers in a walkout, so yeah. We may very well get to the point where we just start seeing walkouts all over the place. It'd be very interesting to see if we start to see things like this happen at lower level companies. When you start to see Amazon workers walking out, who they definitely deserve to be treated better. When you start to see Starbucks employees walking out, like, in a lot of ways, small independent restaurants, if all of your staff walks out, like, you can kind of replace them a lot easier than hundreds of people. Though, so I don't know, until there was a just like restaurant servers union that lots of people were a part of, I don't know how you get these smaller independent companies to start treating people as well as potentially a future big company might treat people. In general, the problem is we just need more people to treat people better in general, and it just kind of never happens that way. Moving on, I want to wrap up here. Nintendo has lost a court appeal in Germany over the eShop pre-order cancellations. We already talked about that. Float on the zero gravity of physics of Cosmic Puzzler Heavenly Bodies is a feature from game developer. We just looked at that game. Pokemon Unite has topped 50 million downloads in 6 months. Tencent Games formed a new publishing label called Level Infinite. An indie dev has accused the Kalashnikov gun makers of stealing weapon designs. They also accused the gun manufacturer of unfairly licensing said gun designs to a popular online shooter, Escape from Tarkov. Which, So it's a real gun maker, or kind of like a prop gun maker, I think, more than an actual gun that you'd actually want to shoot, stealing video game gun designs. Usually the accusations are the opposite direction, but I wouldn't be surprised if both happen fairly commonly. And at a certain point, I don't know if guns in general deserve to be copyrighted in shape or form, and it comes into a weird situation where I do believe 3D models of guns probably deserve to be copyrighted, so I don't feel like a hammer design should be copyrightable. And in a lot of ways, I would look at a gun and think of it as a tool like a hammer. But then a 3D model of a hammer, I would consider copyrightable. So, weird. Like, I don't think I, in my mind, have a fair breakdown of how I would lean in an opinion on that. I'd have to think about it, certainly. Like, in a lot of ways, I feel like guns in particular, we have good designs and we don't need new designs for guns. like, particularly if you're not making practical improvements. If you're not making them lighter, less likely to jam. If you're not just improving something, less parts, more waterproof, things like that, then there really is no need to develop a new gun just to make it look fancy. There is definitely complaints about guns more and more just trying to make everything feel like it's a video game and take away and disassociate in the mind of people that the thing in their hand is a deadly weapon. In all fairness, there is a decent argument towards the idea of guns should have thorns around their handle grips. That, like, every time you pull the trigger, it just straight up stabs you, scratches you, really painfully, or tasers in the grips, just so that nobody is out there shooting them just for fun or without any consequences. Like, if at the very least there was a needle that sucked in the blood of whoever was holding a gun and coated the bullet with your blood, that would be an interesting, like, Judge Dredd style of deterrent to misusing guns, or brainwashing yourself that a gun is not a dangerous tool and a dangerous weapon. Like, guns do often shoot hot shells on people and burn them, and if you could correct that so that didn't happen as much, maybe you shouldn't. But I don't want to get into a big gun rant, because inevitably somebody will go, no, that's a stupid idea, you're stupid, and then they'll just try and troll and not really have a logical argument against it. Moving on. Ubisoft debuts Quartz, we had already talked about that. Here we have a game called Find the Sunbed, which looks like a low effort parkour game, $4.49, several languages. Here we have a game called Rep It, which looks like garbage, for $3.49, 26 languages allegedly. Here we have Real Flight 9.5, which I don't think there's enough here to interest me. It seems like you're flying model airplanes, and since I don't really care about flying model airplanes, I think I would fall out of the range of people who would want to do that in a virtual space. Again, that definitely is the case for a lot of games. Certainly is that you kind of have to like doing the thing in the real world before you would want to do it in the virtual world.
I'll get it right this time. The real battle begins. Let him go.
Okay,
Why is this
hit
so
that.
hard?
And hit that. In the turn. Here we have a game called Capia, which looks like it's a maybe 3D puzzle game. I don't know if it's single player though, because the company is called 2 for 2. Yeah, it kind of looks like a 3D point and click adventure game. It could fall apart. This trailer's not really showing us a lot. The art style is kind of unique and weird, but I like weird, certainly. Coming soon, English only, single player. Alright, well, since it's coming soon, I'll put it on the follow list. This is really one of those games, though, that feels like it really shouldn't be coming out now without some advertisement. And it doesn't support VR, but it does have a zoom in mode. I kind of thought for a second that it would be a VR game. Here we have a game called Bonsai Bat, which just is a player versus player game of no interest. It's not my turn yet, I guess. Here we have a game called A-Train All Aboard Tourism, which is mixed already. I think I probably could dismiss it. Don't get confused by the anime, guys or girls. I think generally the actual game, the actual sim, is questionable. $53.99 is way too expensive. Whole bunch of languages. Yeah, that price just immediately demands it be dismissed. We have a Pupatan Legend VR, which seems to be a VR like fighting game of some sort. They're calling it a Battle Royale first-person shooter. Feels like it might be a Korean game. $17.99 English only. Yeah, the idea that you'd get a Battle Royale game to work though in a VR aspect definitely feels unrealistic.
Smiles are the best medicine. Let us conclude. Faith is an No, the smiles are not free.
This will be the last game we play. Here we have a game called Stay Safe 2020, which, yeah, don't think there's anything here. I think you're just kind of avoiding giant COVID balls. This is one of those games that's trying to be relevant and won't make any sense in a few years. English full audio, free to play. No to that. Here we have a Neolithic to the End, which, yeah, this is just asset flip game content. RPG Maker seems to imply that it might be some lewd content, but I suspect there actually isn't. Early access, English and Chinese.
Stop!
Sexual content's mostly text-based. Blood gore can be turned off. Nudity and sexual content. None of which is in the base game, which, if everything can be taken out of your base game, that does kind of highlight that there's really no reason for it to be there in the first place. Let's hope this works. Yes. I think this will.
You refuse to listen.
Here we have a game called Re-Survivor, which looks like it's nothing. Free, Japanese only. Starting to see more garbage Japanese games, which is probably a good thing. Just showing that more small independent game developers are trying to make games from Japan. Here we have something called Unidentified, which don't think there's anything here. Looks like an asset flip shooter. English only. In these trailers, all I'm seeing is just like white blurry smoke and an occasional monster way at the end here. Here we have a game called VR Pictures, which looks very Salvador Dali-esque. Yeah. I feel like we'd seen something like this before. 99 cents, requires VR, English and Russian. I'll put it on the follow list, but probably I'm never getting VR. Here we have a game called Death Code, which looks like it's probably a Chinese or Japanese only visual novel. Doesn't look terrible. Doesn't seem to show much though. $2.09 is way too cheap for a VR visual novel, and Chinese only. Yeah, probably means it doesn't have much going. What I'm not seeing here is the Chinese visual novels used to have a habit of showing a lot of empty backgrounds like this. they've tended to get away from that and start to actually show the people, which I think is an improvement. Here we have quiz poker, mix of quiz and poker, which looks like nothing of interest. $5.99, several languages. Here we have sword maker, which looks like nothing of interest. Doesn't really look like a game at all. $6.24, English only. Here we have Kitty Cat Squash, which just looks like a match 2 game if I was to guess. $1.79, English only, allegedly full on you. Here we have something called Cocaine Dealer, which, yeah, I don't think I would want to play a game where I'm just a cocaine dealer. $3.99, English only. Here we have a game called The Button, which looks like garbage. Early access free, English only. If it's free, why put it out in early access at all? Why not finish it first? Here we have something called Filthy Us, which may very well be a Korean horror game from the looks of it. Sometimes hard to tell. Very weird graphics, but I wouldn't be surprised if English was not supported. $9.89, Chinese only. Yeah, that sucks. Because it looks like there might actually have been something here worth covering during Halloween month. Here we have a game called Battle of the Robots, which is too dark, and it just is like one hallway where you're fighting a couple of robots. So that looks uninteresting. 59 cents is too cheap. English only. Here we have Kubinashi Recollection, which, yeah, seems to be maybe a time manipulation game. Maybe that's how you play it. Even if that's not what it is, it seems like it's just mostly a platforming game. Yeah, not time manipulation, you just have different heads that you can stack up and stand on. Yeah, I don't think there's enough of a game there though. $9.59, English, Chinese, and Japanese. And then I think we had already talked about this game and put it on the wish list. And then we have this game called This is the President, which is already mixed, so I can dismiss it to start with. I think it is fairly dangerous to have any game where you play as a US president, even if they're fictional US presidents and fictional events. It's fairly dangerous. $13.49, English and Russian. Alright. So let me just quickly go through my Twitter feeds and see if there's any new news, and then when there inevitably isn't any new news, we will call it a day. Yeah, I suppose it probably is the right attitude to just assume that not too many people are watching my videos this December winter season. Sam & Max Beyond Time and Space has apparently been re-released on Steam. These games were on Steam, but I guess they may have very well disappeared. And now are getting relisted. They're not getting particularly relisted, though, as remasters. Yeah. Like, this is being developed, says it was developed and published by Skunk Ape Games. Which, yeah, that's not Telltale. So did Skunk Ape get the Sam & Max games? This clearly is Beyond Time and Space, the game I covered before. And it seems like they're definitely not trying to really do too many bundling here. They're not doing episodes on seasons like Telltale originally had it. And there are slight improvements to making it widescreen. There's just and I haven't seen any story about anything being censored in this second release, so I wouldn't be surprised if they, after getting pushback on that, decided against that. It's really hard, though, to potentially even think about the idea of buying the game twice. It's just not a good enough game to justify that. So yeah, I would have to really just leave it at that and say, yeah, there will be some games that get re-released or change ownership and get relisted, but that doesn't mean just by default I should cover them. There's definitely some games I just didn't finish or didn't like that I would definitely not then decide to buy a second time. Maybe if I had infinite money and infinite time and I was just maintaining a collection of remasters for old games, that would make sense, but no. I don't think that's hyper consumerism for no good reason. I think that is being a sucker for yeah, that's a much better way to describe it. That is just being straight up a sucker and buying things you don't need. It's very much similar to like the anime DVDs I have now. Like I bought a bunch of anime DVDs 10, 15 years ago, some of which I never even got around to watching. It would be insane now to think about replacing those with Blu-rays, particularly since I don't have the free time to ever watch them or the inclination to watch them. Yeah. The only scenario I guess that could probably happen is if I just for some reason couldn't play video games anymore, lost the use of my hands or something, then I might watch more passive shows and need a massive amount of passive shows to watch, but something short of that unlikely occurrence. I can't imagine getting away from playing games so much so that I now have a ridiculous amount of free time to watch movies and replace old DVDs I have with new Blu-rays or new UHD Blu-rays in particular. At a certain point, replacing things like that would be for like the next generation. If there was somebody I knew that was into anime and I was just going to give all of my DVDs to that person in this fictional story, maybe at that point it would start to make sense to give away the old ones or give away new ones, new copies, and keep the old ones. Also, in the case of anime DVDs versus pretty much any other DVDs, that they're the one style of DVD that tends to go out of availability fairly high and never come back, whereas you can often get anything else fairly easily. There are a few things definitely not available on DVD, have never been available on DVD or came out for a brief time, but not a lot, not an entire genre in particular. Okay. So we had like two stories here from Video Games Chronicle. Battlefield 2042's final update this year will be released on Thursday. Patch note reveals improvements to the bullet hit registration. I thought 2042 was brand new, and I guess maybe it is. It's the final update of the year, which is really just to say there could be an update on January 1st next year. And then GameDeveloper.com has an article here. Activision Blizzard faces new demands from an alleged victim of sexual harassment. A high-profile lawyer known for representing victims has levied new demands at Activision Blizzard. Oh, do we know what the demands are? The allegations not only include groping and sexual comments made by superiors, but also pushback and demotions from HR following their complaints. So, this is that same person. So the 3 demands are a streamlined and sympathetic process to provide sexual harassment and abuse victims money from an expanded settlement fund of $100 million, a public apology from Christine and other victims. No, a public apology to Christine and other victims, and a review by a neutral third party, not a law firm hired by the company, to investigate career damage that employees like Christine have endured. This minor workers advocacy group, a better ABK's, calls for a third-party investigation. Oh, this mirrors the worker advocacy group, a better ABK's call for a third-party investigation into Activision. So, okay, those are the 3 demands. That's barely news. Like, lawyers make demands all the time. Alright, well, that's going to be it for the stream. At least we got everything done on Shadowverse. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching.